Russia appears to be advancing in multiple directions, not just around Bakhmut. And does it indicate that things aren't as rosy for the Ukrainian armed forces as they might want us to believe? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It is January 13th, 2023. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get right into it. Now, first, you guys know, obviously, I have tremendous sympathy for Ukraine, right? Their country being invaded by their aggressive, much larger neighbor. But what I do as an analyst is tell the facts on the ground. And I think the facts on the ground don't look great for Ukraine. And here's why. First off, you guys can see on the tactical map here that Russia is really pressing its attacks across this front line from south of Bakhmut near Kurdyomivka all the way north to Rozdolivka. And you can see that this ostensibly still has Ukraine controlling the western portion of Soledar. We're going to take a look at other maps here in a minute, but what I want you guys to see from this one is just how hard Russia's pressing its attacks. And the fact that, the fact that they're still making these pretty aggressive moves is pretty surprising to me. The temperature in Ukraine is in the negatives. Let's see if we can look it up. In Bakhmut right now, it is 30 degrees, a low of 29. So you guys can see it's pretty cold. It's snowing. So this is an indicator that it's quite chilly out there. And this, if you've never done military operations in a very cold environment, it's hard. And Russia has had logistics issues kind of at baseline. So it's surprising to me that they can sustain this level of offensive. And it speaks to the fact that this may actually have been more planned than we are giving them credit for. It felt like for a while they were using mobilized troops to probe Ukrainian lines. Now it seems as though they are using at least somewhat better trained troops to push Ukrainians back. In Soledar, near Krasnohora, they are trying to advance near Bakhmut. What's also interesting, though, is to the south here, and you guys can kind of see it, that there's a lot of active shelling here. And when we go over to the territory control map, you can see that two towns that were listed as recently liberated, Mirne and Dorozhnyanka, have both been retaken by Russians. Now, there's the most likely explanation for this is that Ukrainian forces were engaging in a limited offensive operation here, and that those forces now need to be diverted to prevent the loss of Bakhmut and Soledar. Do I think this is the right call? No, we've talked about this. You can tell yourself that Bakhmut is not a valuable ultimate target, and Soledar, a salt mine on the suburbs of that city, is even less valuable. But it's easy to say, and it's hard to actually read on the news that this is happening. So it's possible that Ukrainian's Ministry of Defense has changed their tune and actually, in fact, it doesn't want to see Soledar and Bakhmut fall, even though, as we've talked about for weeks, this has been written off. And so they probably or possibly have diverted forces from this area to the Bakhmut front, meaning that they have to stop any sort of offensive operations. You guys can see here that though Russia has been counterattacking there for some time, we reach back almost a month, and you guys can see that these lines have been stabilized for a while, and it's actually Russia who has been pushing Ukrainians out. So it's also possible that simply Ukrainian forces are having logistics, supply, and also possibly personnel issues. And let's take a look at, of course, some of the more detailed maps. Here is War Mapper's depiction of the Bakhmut area. You guys could see that Russian forces have advanced nearly to this rail line in Krasnohora, in Pithorodne. They've taken, this has them having taken most of Soledar, but not advancing all the way to the rail lines. When we look at, let's see if we can find it here. He also has, there you go, a somewhat broader picture of the situation. There's Soledar. You can see them advancing around Soledar, attempting to get to these rail lines. I do appreciate that War Mapper, who is good at his job, is really, I think, overemphasizes some of these rail lines. They make them look really essential when rail lines were more essential in like World War One. Now, of course, I think open roadways are much more important. But you guys can see the real important part, which is Russia advancing almost to these rail lines. And we talked about the fact that it may be Ukraine conducting a controlled withdrawal, setting up fighting positions in a more secure location. However, it could also be a sign that they aren't able to stabilize these issues with the front line, and that they actually don't have the combat power to even stop these Russian advances. It would align with the fact that suddenly 9 months, almost a year into the war, and the US, Europe, and other allies have started sending suddenly top tier equipment like British Challenger 2s, Leopards, Bradleys, very advanced mechanized fighting vehicles are suddenly going to the front lines. What changed, right? Why, after a year of fighting, have all the allies agreed to provide this very heavy hardware? It's not clear. There's some theories that it relates to a planned offensive in the spring. Certainly the timeline is about right for a spring offensive. You would want now to give about 60 days for those crews to get trained up so that they could launch an offensive in the spring. But it could also be that Ukraine may have gone to its allies and said, hey, listen, we see our troop strength. We see the data. There's some real problems on the horizon. Our force generation efforts are slowing. Very possible when you have a general mobilization a year ago at the outset of the war, right? You only have so many people turning 18 and able to be brought into the fight when you have this fairly high level of casualties and you've already mobilized everyone. In contrast, Russia is still under a partial mobilization, so Russia has a deeper well of young, healthy men that they can recruit into this fighting effort, whereas it's not clear that Ukraine still does. But so only time is really going to tell whether this effort, this additional hardware is a reflection or a response to manpower or munition or firepower problems in the Ukrainian armed forces, or if it's just a planned step on a way to a major spring offensive. Nonetheless, it is we can hope that Ukraine does indeed dig in, establish a new front line, that they are better able to blunt this Russian offensive. Anyway, that is basically all I had, guys. If you want access and to check out my breakdowns of the uncensored combat videos, the new video drops today, and we're going to be doing all the combat footage from Soledar. You definitely want to become a member of the Patreon. Thanks, as always, to my Lieutenant tier patrons. And, of course, the link is in the description if you want to check it out. And I'll see all you guys in the next one.